So I'm looking forward to really find out as much as possible about your best practices on using Vim and kind of diving into the source code and really having a look at it and finding out like what you guys have in plans for Neo-Vim and how you're developing the source code and how it has diverged from the original Vim. Because that's the part that's not clear. Like when I can look in, I can look in Git-K and inspect what you guys are doing, but it doesn't tell me what you guys are thinking and how the project is evolving. So I really want to know more about that.
True. And it's also true, I would say, that Vim is also developing, and it's also developing, but sometimes in another direction. So it's not just that we are diverging, it's like both of us are diverging, and sometimes we try to collaborate to make things closer again, but that doesn't always work.
Yeah. So shall we do like this? I will just, I'll switch my screen and then I can open up the Neo-Vim source code and we can start looking at it and you can guide me through it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So can you give me a short overview here of the source code? You guys have added, like your focus is basically making sure that it's easier to extend. Where if one wants to contribute to the source code, where should one start?
There is two important part of the source code, I would say. The most is like in source Vim. Yeah, here. So this is like the C core.
Yeah.
But we also regard Lua, the scripting language Lua, as a core language. Yeah. So it's like equally valid to have built-in code written in Lua, but that is like currently in a different folder. That is in runtime rather than source.
Right.
Yeah, there. So Lua, and then yes, especially everything in Vim, and both LSP and TreeStitter, which are both two big topics, which we will probably touch on later. But I think we shouldn't dive into them right now because then we will get lost in them and lose track of like the overview that I think you want to start with.
Yeah, sure. I just want to ask something about Lua. Is it a plan to have Lua as the main scripting language for Neo-Vim?
Yeah, I would say to some extent it already is, but I mean, we still have all like the Vim script code more or less unchanged, but all like the new functionality we are writing right now, we write it in, we don't want to write much more Vim script code. So all like the new features are written in Lua instead of Vim script. I mean, if they don't need to be written in C, because then they are in C, but if they can be written like a script, then we prefer to use Lua for all new code, more or less.
Okay. My impression was that it was the Python that was going to be used as the main language, but it turns out that was wrong. It's actually Lua.
Yeah, it's a little bit complicated because when Neo-Vim started back in 2014, then the main impression was that Python was like the main scripting language for Vim, apart from Vim script itself, of course. So if you want to make a fork of Vim and claim that, oh, we are compatible with like 95% of all existing plugins, then you need to have Python support. I mean, in practice, because that's what all the users expect. Yeah. So we still have this Python client, and it's still maintained because it's seen as quite important for that. But there is a distinction here. The difference between Python and Lua currently is that Lua code you can run in process. I mean, you can run Lua code in the same process as Neo-Vim itself, while Python is currently delegated to an external process.
Okay. So Lua runs more like Vim script.
Yeah. So if you're just writing a new plugin and you're not dependent on a specific language ecosystem, you just need to write some code that does something, then the recommendation from us is to write it in Lua.
Okay.
Unless you care about Vim and the Neo-Vim compatibility, because then it makes sense to use Vim script, obviously, if that's your priority. But if you only care about Neo-Vim itself, it's Lua that we recommend.
Okay. So show me something cool in the Neo-Vim source code.
Yeah, I can show you what I happen to have worked with the most, which is changes to like the UI subsystem. I mean the user interface subsystem. So
Right.
if we go into source NeoVIM again,
Yeah.
and then you can open API, the API folder. And then we can look into this file called UI events. So this is one of the main differences between Vim and NeoVim. If you forget about like history and all of that, is that we are doing graphical user interfaces in a completely different way. What
Okay.
Vim is doing is that you at compile time, you can compile either GTK into your Vim binary or Qt or whatever like Windows native toolkit. But we don't do that. So our core binary, it doesn't really know anything about graphical toolkits. So what we instead expect is that you write a graphical interface as a separate process, similar to Python plugins in a way, that will, so this separate process will instead invoke GTK or Qt or whatever toolkit you prefer, and then communicate with NeoVim over a socket, which can be like a Unix the name socket or a named pipe to avoid this. Because people say, oh, you cannot use localhost because that's insecure, and we don't use it either. We can use these named pipes that are secure as any file operation. And what this file does, it's that it essentially describes this protocol that the external UI and NeoVim talk to each other with.
So this is everything that's needed to communicate with the core, and the core is essentially not using any UI. So it doesn't even have cursors now. It's just completely just a abstract piece of code that just.
Yeah, almost correct. This is actually the events that NeoVim sends to the UI, and
Okay.
but this doesn't contain the methods that the UI needs to call back to Vim, which is rather in the file that's called UI.c.
Okay, so this is from the core. So when it says mouse on, it's something that it tells the UI to turn on the cursor or not, right?
Yeah, exactly. So all these are events from NeoVim to the external UI. But
Okay.
yeah, here is the functions that the UI can call in instead. For instance, you can ask NeoVim to change the size of the screen or the grid, which we prefer nowadays because in the latest version of the protocol, you can have multiple grids instead of just one big grid. So because initially when it was Teruda who started this like abstraction work, like initially this was just like a thin abstraction over the terminal interface. So essentially this even this like formalized UI protocol, it was essentially like a replica of say cursors or Tmax. I mean, it's like a basic terminal interface. But then we gradually try to add new features to make UI that doesn't look like a terminal, but you can actually have like floating windows and pop-up windows, and like you can have messages as messages pop-ups or whatever the UI prefers. So we want the UI model to be more like an abstract model where the external UI determines the presentation and the core is managed like the information of the buffer contents and so on.
Right.
And since you ask about ncurses, that sort of thing is actually currently in the core. We want to change that so that the terminal user interface, essentially, we want to regard the pseudo terminal as another GUI toolkit, which is just very basic. But currently, we still treat the terminal user interface a bit specially. If you want to look into more of that, it's another subdirectory of source NeoVim that's called TUI. So it's a bit down. There you can see it there actually. And then it's TUI.c, which is the interesting file. So this is still kind of like a special case. which makes the code more complicated than it really needs to be. But there was a Google Summer of Code project, actually a project last year, that made some progress in making the terminal more like any other user interface. But we haven't really had time to fully merge and integrate that. So currently, realistically, this will not be integrated in this release. I mean, the release we are planning now for Christmas-ish, but it will probably happen in the version after that.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is basically this UI architecture is a little bit more messy and multi-layered than it really needs to be. We could simplify it later on, but currently it works for the current use cases, but we wanted to do more later, basically.
So when you're using when we run NeoVIM as a terminal application, we're still using the TOI, which is part of the core. So it's not using the API at all.
Yes, sort of. It uses something similar to the API, but it doesn't use a socket. So the terminal interface, it runs like a separate thread, and then it just passes the pointer of the data structure from one thread to another. So this has some extra logic that we would like to remove. I mean, the TOI should really work just as another UI and use a socket.
Right. So it's quite a lot of code that is very specific for.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why. I mean, it sort of needs to be because the terminal works differently, and this is a protocol that has been like developed by piling on new features for like 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
So this code still needs to be special. All that we are saying is we can separate this special code from the core. So this special handling doesn't need to affect the design of the core anymore, because this will be isolated as a separate component.
So is it possible today to compile the core as a like just a standalone program that is not dependent on any UI?
I mean, that's what it does right now. But what's happened is that this TUI code, it's always compiled in, but you don't need to run it. You can start NeoVIM with like a command line flag to completely disable this module. So you can't avoid compiling it, but you can say to Vim that you don't want to use it.
So I'm thinking like, how close are we to being able to embed Vim into other applications without any UI, but just sort of integrating it with any UI?
That's a good question, because there are some solutions. I mean, there are some existing embeddings like that. We are not saying that we are like 100% happy with them, but they are already making some progress. I think the best example right now might be, it's called Fire and Vim, which is like an embedding of NeoVim into any text area widget, either in Chromium or Firefox. So yeah, you can search for it, and hopefully we can find some nice screenshots.
Yep.
I mean, I don't use it myself, to be honest, but it looks really cool. Yeah, exactly. That one.
So this compiles to.
Yeah, there is a good screenshot of embedding like a.
Okay.
And as you see, it essentially looks like you have a terminal instance inside the text area. And maybe that's not the ideal solution, but it's like a good enough solution for now, I will claim. But you can use NeoVim inside your Firefox, even if it looks like an embedded terminal. It still works, right?
Yeah. So is this C code compiled to JavaScript basically?
No, I think this Fire and Vim, is a plugin that runs in the browser. So it still runs NVim like a binary. So you still need to have NVim install like an application. And this is entirely client side. This is not something that the website does. This is something you embed into the browser as a user. So there is no like WebAssembler involved or anything like that. I mean, we would like to do that for sure, but that's not what's going on here. So this is just like a client side embedding.
Okay.
And
So this kind of shows that it's possible to embed into the source code of Firefox and just compile it in.
yeah, or rather, this uses this socket communication. So Firefox will launch its child process. It will launch Vim as a child process, and there is a flag. It's quite simple. You call Vim with the flag -- embed, and that tells NeoVim that it shouldn't display its own graphical interface. It should just listen for API calls on standard input, and then it will send these UI events I show you to standard output. I mean, it will send the output as like a structured format of this API events I showed you before.
Okay. So then if you start it with embed flag, then you can send those events to it over the STD in and get events back over STD out.
Yeah, right. So you send like more abstract events that segments like this was on like a key press or this was a mouse press, and back you get back events like change the color scheme or change the display of the pop-up menu and so on.
Okay. Cool. So what else? What is the next step here? Is it to be able to embed the whole code as a library into another application?
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing we want to do. I wouldn't say that's like the immediate thing we want to do. The first thing we want to do is to make it easier. We still want to use the same like RPC communication, but we want to make this this protocol look less like just like a re-implementation of Tmax, and we want it to be more semantic. So especially for when you want to embed NVIM into another text editor, like there is already a very good embedding of NVIM into VS Code, but then you don't want to look at NVIM as like a terminal with some extra features. You want to get live updates of the buffer contents. That thing we already has implemented, but then you want to get more like semantic information of what is displayed in an NVIM window. For instance, you know these things, these signs that are to the left of the text in some plugins. Like if you have like a git diff, it will show like plus and minus signs next to the text.
Like icons.
So that's something we want to send as an abstract event that says, oh, there is a sign on line number 15, instead of literally sending like this terminal carousel of a plus sign in a red color. So we want the UI to decide for itself how it should draw signs, for instance.
Okay. So
that I will sorry interrupting. So that I will say is like priority one, to continue this work of making the protocol more semantic, so to speak, rather than being like a very fancy terminal. And then after that, when that's done, I will say we want to make it easier to embed NVIM as a library and not only as a RPC protocol, because that's not convenient for everyone. As a concrete example, like I can mention OnlyVim. Have you looked into this project, OnlyVim?
OnlyVim, no?
No. So what they did, so they actually had like two versions of the editor. So OnlyVim 1, yeah, it's good. You can Google it. I think it's easier for you to. It's no L in it. It's ONI. It's like one, but almost. So you can look at the correction there. It says OnlyVim with an I.
Is this correct? Oh, there.
There, yeah. OnlyVim, yeah. Yeah, so that's the one. So currently, so this is like a graphical interface project. And currently, they are not using NeoVim for this version 2. Currently, they are using as their own fork of Vim itself, which they call LibVim. But they still want to eventually switch back to NeoVim, I think. So it will be relevant for us to try to make NeoVim behave like a library in the same way that they currently are using Vim. I mean, the other Vim as a library. So this is like a long-term goal for us, but it's not something we currently work on, to be clear.
So they're using standard Vim as a library?
Sort of. I mean, they have their own fork, which they call libvim, and they have made. Still, they need to make quite a bit of changes themselves, but I think they are making. I mean, they have made significantly less changes than we have done. So it's not really a fork in that sense, that because Neo-Vim obviously it forked 5 years ago, so we have accumulated lots of small and big differences. So I'm saying libvim is still a fork, but it's obviously a less smaller fork, if just for the fact that it has been around for a shorter time. And I mean, we are still talking to these guys regularly, and we hope to eventually cooperate with them and make NeoVim the basis of Univim too. But that requires, I mean, us to put in work to make NeoVim work as a library, and we haven't really done that yet. It currently works as an RPC server rather than like a C library.
Okay. So what are the changes that they have done? Why is it hard to merge what they have done into what you're doing, and maybe then combine that with the current interface? So maybe the library is in the middle there.
To be perfectly honest, I think it wasn't really their changes to Vim that's hard for us to merge. It's sort of it's more things related to the build system. For instance, NeoVim has some more mandatory dependencies than Vim. So that's also another important difference between Vim and NeoVim, which was decided very early in the life of NeoVim. The thing with Vim is that you have a lot of compile flags for Vim. I mean, you decide at compile time where do you want to include certain features into Vim or not. And this includes even very simple things as Vim script. You can compile a version of latest Vim. I mean, the very latest commit, and you can ask Vim to be compiled without Vim script and or without syntax highlighting, and a lot of these things. And one difference there is that for this reason, as NeoVim wants to only have one build, or like one build on each platform at least, we are mandatorying you to always include libuv, because for us, async jobs is like optional. Every NeoVim instance should have the possibility to have asynchronous jobs, which means that we always depend on libuv, and also we always mandate a Lua interpreter to be embedded. So currently, it's a little bit harder for a cross-platform project like Oni2 to really build Vim like as a standard library and embed it into another executable, because then you also need to support all these C libraries that we mandate to be included. And the old Vim doesn't do this, because in Vim you can ask it to build without Lua support, you can ask it to be built without asynchronous job support, and so on. So when they say that they include libvim, what they are including is like a restricted version of Vim where lots of these optional features has been disabled.
Mm-hmm.
So the main work to make a feasible NVim2 is to somehow enable a similar kind of build. I mean, we will probably still mandate a Lua interpreter because TreeStitter and stuff depends on that. But we will make it easier to just, I mean, as an external user, you should probably just be able to include some kind of amalgamated source tree where we just include the source of Lua, maybe, or something like that. I mean, nothing has been decided. Did my microphone get muted?
Yes, sorry, Björn.
Okay, what I'm saying is that we in the NeoVim project, we need to put in some work into our build system to make it a lot easier for an external product like NeoVim to depend on NeoVim as a library, because currently they decided it will take them too much work to work with our build system to build NeoVim as a library. But it was a lot easier to do that with Vim, as Vim still has all these compile flags.
Okay. And so they are basically writing the whole UI in Reason.
Yeah, So let's see. Reason is basically this JavaScript-like fork of OCaml, and they also made their own UI toolkits as well, I think.
So
Yeah, Reverie. I mean, sorry, I mean Reverie. Yeah.
okay, Reverie framework, right?
Yeah. So here is the thing that they are doing, and as you see, they still try to synchronize with. I think they as they have made less changes, it's like easier for them to synchronize with upstream Vim, because I think they regard it more like a branch sort of rather than a fork. And also, I don't think they want to make too much changes because they still hope that maybe in like the time frame of 1 year or 2 years, they can switch back to Neo-Vim. I mean, there's nothing promised, but I think that's like a shared goal for both of us, that we can go back to this thing.
Yeah, so they changed from NeoVim to original Vim and created their libbvim because of the problems with the build system.
Yes, sort of. There still is this thing called the Univim 1, which is like which I think it used Node even. So it was more, it is more that Univim 2 is like a reboot of the entire project. So it's not like the change from NeoVim to Vim inside the same project. It's more like the development team said, like, this thing only in one, it was fun, but it's a bit too messy, so we want to start over with a clean state and make it and build a better design from the ground up. So you can still find, I still think it's maintained by some users, this only Vim 1.
Okay.
But this is sort of like this is like our dreams of the future. This is, if you're more curious about the things that we are actually working right now, we can get back to that.
Yeah, let's get back to that.
Yeah, because then we will get into those two things I mentioned, which are LSP and TreeStitter, which I will say are the two main features for the next version of Neo-Vim itself.
All right. Do you want to share your screen so it's easier for you to show?
No, I think it's fine because there's nothing in particular that I really need to show you. We can work with the source code, I think.
All right.
So we can go back to if we go back to like the Lua directory of the source code. Yeah, this one, right? There is this file called TreeStitter. So we can look into this. And so where to just give you like the elevator pitch version. So what TreeStitter is, it's basically a implementation of a parser. I mean, you send in source code and you get like a source abstract syntax tree back, which is, it's not designed to be part of a compiler. It's explicitly designed to be part of an editor, which means that you can do incremental parses really fast. So essentially, if you're making small changes to the source input, it's like you're writing a new if statement or something, then it only needs to reparse the part of the code that you're changing. So it's really fast. And the point of this is that then we can do things like syntax highlighting. Instead of using regexes, which always are an approximation, right? We can do syntax highlighting of something that actually implements the correct grammar of the language. So this TreeStitter thing, it was started by developers of the Atom editor. So it's this guy, he's called Max Brunfeld or something like that. So, and I think it's better if you search for TreeStitter itself, because yeah, actually it's that's like our integration. So if you start with the second link, I think it's better, because this is like the library itself, and this is a C library that anyone can embed. So I know Atom is using it, and I think VS Code is working on embedding it. I think they are getting quite far because, as you know, Atom was GitHub's own editor, and then VS Code are Microsoft's editor. But now, as Microsoft has bought up GitHub, I think the development of Atom itself has slowed down because the focus is on VS Code. But I still think they want to use TreeStitter because this is like a C library that is completely disconnected from the rest of Atom. So we can very easily embed this inside NeoVIM as it's just a C library.
So what languages does it support?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, it supports all the popular languages at least. So it supports C, and it supports JavaScript and HTML and CSS, all that sort of things. And it also supports Rust and Go. And since we in NeoVim, as we depend on Lua, I know some people in the NeoVim project has worked on a Lua parser. I mean, there existed one before, but it was sort of not really like, it wasn't complete, but I think NeoVim people has run with it and make it a really good Lua parser also. And it's not really hard to make your own parser. If you like, we can look at how it looks like to define a parser, if you want to go dive into that.
Yeah, let's do that.
So if we go up to on the top of this page that we are at, I mean in the web browser, and now we can look at the main TreeStitter organization. No, I mean even I mean TreeStitter instead of the specific repo. So I mean in the very top of the page. Yeah, there. Because then we can find, if we can look at the first one, which says JavaScript grammar for TreeStitter.
Okay.
Or Python, it doesn't matter. We can take any one. And then we can go into, oh, they have changed the layout once more, but if we click review code, and then we should look at, let's see what file it is. I think it's grammar.js. Yeah, this should be it, yeah.
Okay.
So this is the input file. This is what you have to write as a grammar developer. So this doesn't contain any code, right? This is like a declarative language to define a language. And anyone who works a little bit with compilers or anything like that will like immediately understand how this works. So if you are writing a compiler for your own language, it's very easy to also define a TreeStitter grammar for it.
So I guess one of the complications could be like, so this is using its own syntax for the grammar. Or can you compile like Lex grammar or something into this?
No, you can't do that. So you need to write this file for your own language.
Okay.
But this is like, this is not something you need to change later. So this should just be a definition of the grammar itself. And then when you're doing things like syntax highlighting or like refactors or whatever you want to do, you don't need to change this file. Instead, you are using another language. This is called the query language. So the only thing that this file does is to define the grammar of the language itself.
Right. So this splits it up into a tree, and then TreeStitter basically makes the nodes available to the application.
Yeah, exactly. So most users or even plugin developers doesn't need to look into this file. They essentially only needs to look into it if there is a bug in it. Mm-hmm. Actually, for like using this grammar later for defining syntax highlighting or doing whatever you want to do, then you don't need to change this anymore.
So why not use something like libclang or something, or the other utilities available through the Clang project?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I mean, that's a really good question, because libclang does a lot more than just this. Exactly. It doesn't only do syntax, it does a lot of semantic information. Like you can look up symbols, you can get warnings about undefined behavior and so on. And that thing we also want, but we regard this as a separate concern from just the syntax trees, because the point of TreeStitter is that this doesn't only work for one language. We are having a shared C API that works for any language that anyone defines as TreeStitter grammar for. And the issue with libclang is that that's a very nice API, but it only works for C-like languages. And then we will need another API to talk to librust, for instance. I mean, you can embed the Rust compiler as a library essentially and get the same information. But that's just a separate API. And also, this parser is really fast. I mean, as I told you, it's both incremental, and as it only does parsing, it doesn't do any like semantic processing or anything. So this thing is really fast. It's fast enough so we can use it as syntax highlighting for every single key press, because it's even faster than regex highlighting, I would say. But what you are talking about when we use libclang and things like that, then we also want that, but we don't want to run that on every key press. We don't want to run like a full semantic analysis of your C++ code on every key press, because that will be too slow, right? And you don't want your editor UI to need to wait while you are doing semantic analysis of C++ code, right?
So if that part is running as a separate process, how would that communicate with the editor?
Yeah, that gets to that other thing which you show next to TreeStitter, which is LSP.
Okay.
And what LSP is, it's a protocol that the Microsoft people, they put out like a specification and everything. But essentially what that is, that's the solution they develop for VS Code. So because in VS Code, they don't want to embed all these different C libraries. So instead they define their own RPC protocol to communicate with the compiler, which you can say is quite similar to what we have done, except that, I mean, their protocol, it's more like semantic. I mean, you're predefining all the commands that make sense for a compiler library. So for instance, there is a standard way to getting the diagnostics of any compiler, or a standard way to look up the definition of a symbol, regardless of the compiler. So, and the thing is that this issue here is that while they are saying this is like a standard that's separate from VS Code, in practice, a lot of the implementations of this LSP protocol is like tied to plugins for the VS Code editor itself. So this is not all like TreeStitter, because the Atom developers, they made a really nice decision to say that, oh, TreeStitter, even if Atom people develops it, it's like independent of Atom itself, because we want anyone to use it. While LSP, my general feeling is like Microsoft, after the fact, decided like, oh, we can just take the protocol that VS Code uses to communicate with its plugins, and then we can dump that in a big specification file, and then we call this an editor independent protocol. But it was very obviously designed to work specifically for VS Code.
Okay.
So a concrete example for that is that since VS Code is written in JavaScript, it's using UTF-16, which is not something you will use if you're not using JavaScript, because any editor that's written in C or Rust or whatever, it will use UTF-8, which is like the modern version of Unicode. But because Microsoft, they made this decision, oh, we're just gonna take whatever we happen to use and call this a standard. It's using UTF-16, which is very inconvenient for everyone else. But it's like we can deal with it. I mean, I shouldn't complain. It's a nice thing that someone stepped up and made an attempt of making a standard. I'm just saying that there are lots of small quirks and like unclarities we need to work around to make this like a first-class experience for end users.
All right. So how does this communicate with TreeStitter? TreeStitter is a library that is compiled in, and it has all of the syntax files written in JavaScript. And is it compiled at?
Yeah. So actually, these JavaScript definitions, they are compiled into C code.
Okay.
So, and so you can think this is like a problem because anytime you need to change the grammar, you need a C compiler. But as I said before, it's quite rare that you actually need to change the grammar. So typically you can just let this grammar be a statically compiled C file that you can use all the time. I can even show you if we, I think we can look in the same repo even if you go up in the web browser and we go back to TreeStitter Python. We can even stay in the same repo, I think, because I think it will show some examples of what I want to show you. So if we look in the folder called queries, and then we can look in highlights. So this is like a very simple Lisp-like language that is actually parsed at runtime by this C library. So this is the thing that translates the grammar into actual highlighting groups in your editor. So for instance, it says that if you have something which is called either none, true, or false, which is like the Boolean values in Python, it should be represented as a constant built-in highlight group in your editor.
Okay.
And here you can do, so this is quite a simple example, but you can do quite complex queries here. So you can say that you want to match something which is an identifier, but it's an identifier where everything is all caps, like this constant thing. But you won't match something which is all caps, but is part of a comment. So this is, even if we are using regex, it's still more like semantic than just using a raw regex, because we can filter out, we can combine these grammar rules with regexes to get really specific and nice syntax highlighting.
Okay. So how difficult is it now to like add syntax aware plugins? Do they have to be written in Lua?
Yeah, more or less, because the API we expose to Lua to plugins is using Lua functions. So in this terminal, you're using NeoVIM, right?
Yeah.
So we can even look into the documentation. If you type :help and then TreeStitter, I mean, you write :help and then or maybe, let's see, what version are you using here? So maybe you're not using the, so what we can do instead is that we go to the NeoVIM source code again, because this also includes the help. So we go up into the, so now we are playing the history in reverse. But we can even, I think we can even use the terminal. We can go into the runtime directory.
Yeah, okay. Because this should be the latest. It's pretty new, so it should be all here.
Yeah, that's fine. So we can go into the doc directory here.
Which one?
One below there. And here is there's a file called TreeStitter. So this is a good experiment, because the point of this documentation is to be readable for someone that's not like into this process, into like what TreeStitter already exists. So it's a good experiment to see how much of this you like are understanding by your own.
Okay, so let's see. TreeStitter library currently does not provide TreeStitter parsers. Okay.
So this talks a bit generally how we integrate parsers, but a little bit below we get into the specific functions. And all these things that you see are methods that are
So
directly
I should be able
called
to
by...
run like TS3. Can I run Lua directly here?
Yeah, but the problem is if your NeoVIM if this is not the latest version, if you not contain this TreeStitter function.
Okay.
You need, I mean, we are having...
So this is
it's a little bit of a tricky situation because we are supposed to have nightly binaries of the master versions. So it should be easy to anyone to very quickly experiment with the latest version without even messing with their dot files or the system libraries. So it's essentially like a self-contained binary that just runs the latest version of NeoVim with all the runtime files without changing the rest of the system at all. But unfortunately, the service that we use for this, which is Travis, they have changed their financial rules. So now we will need to pay them money in order to get an acceptable level of service. So what another of our core developers, who is called Jameson, he's currently putting in a lot of effort to migrate from Travis to GitHub Actions. But we haven't gotten so far yet that we are having functional nightly builds. So currently, you cannot just download a binary and run the latest master, unfortunately. But we hope to get back to that very soon, like maybe within a week or two.
Okay.
But I think we can look at the API still, because it's really not a complicated API, because it's like a tree of nodes. And so each node represents like a non-terminal in the grammar. So you will have a node that means this is an expression. And then maybe the type of this node is binary expression. And then you will have two children, which are the two parts of these binary expressions. So it's really not, once you are able to actually run this code and try it out on a actual, like an actual file of Lua code or C code or whatever, it's quite easy to like experiment with this API interactively to see what you get. And from that, you can design a plugin that does what you want.
So if you want to pop up, for example, a list of completions or some information about the item, you would basically walk the tree. How do you get the current node onto the cursor?
Yeah, there is actually an API function for that. If we go down a little bit, I think it's kind of a bit cryptic. I think this function that's called descendant for range. Basically, this is just like a Lua translation of the C API they use. So, but if we go up a bit, it's in the node, this one, yeah. So this thing, it says it gets the smallest node within this node that spans the given range of row column positions, which sounds a bit technical, but essentially what happens if you put the same position both as start and end, you will get the lowest below children that's possible. Essentially, if the cursor is on an identifier, you will get out the node for that identifier, and then you can walk your way upwards to see what the context is for this identifier. I mean, all the scopes that define variables that are visible in this line of code and so on.
Right. So how does this new functionality simplify things like completion and more complex stuff, like where you is it two different problem domains?
Yeah,
simple highlighting.
It depends because the thing with TreeStitter, a very general rule of thumb is that with TreeStitter you can do stuff that only requires information from one file, which essentially means that you can identify what the local variables are that are visible in a current line. But if you mean completion in the sense that, oh, I want to display all the API methods of a library that I'm importing, then TreeStitter cannot do that, because then you need to understand how this source code integrate with a larger project. And then you instead should use this LSP thing, because then you will interact with a server that understands how, for instance, I mean, if you have some Python code, for instance, you can invoke the Python language server, and this server, it will understand how to get documentation for a API function, or it will understand how to find the list you can autocomplete a method name and find all the relevant methods and so on. So TreeStitter it's best for the thing for like manipulations you can do within a single file. So a good example is if you do a refactor where you only are renaming a local variable visible inside a single file. That's something that TreeStitter is very well suited to, because that's like completely syntactically. You don't really need to understand much of the grammar to do that. You can only look like at the raw definition of the syntax itself to find what the local variables are. But if you want to rename like a field of a class in an entire project, then you need to understand the semantics of the language for like the rules that concern how classes are defined. And that's not something that TreeStitter can do easily, because that's more difficult.
So does TreeStitter completely replace the old syntax highlighting now in Neo-Vim?
I mean, it doesn't do that yet, to be honest, because the highlighting, regex highlighting for Vim, I mean, this is a really old thing in the good sense. I mean, because it supports a large number of languages. I mean, is it like 100 languages or 1,000 languages? I can't remember. So we can't really say that we can remove all that, because TreeStitter will never support all of that languages. But what we hope to do for 0.5 is rather that we can say that TreeStitter will replace highlighting for the most, the 10 most popular languages. So like C code or Lua code, or maybe even Rust code. There we can say that by default we are using TreeStitter instead of the old regex highlighting. But we cannot just remove that old code, because that's still useful to a lot of our users.
So besides being a bit faster, what are some of the other benefits of TreeStitter?
I mean, if we are speaking highlighting, I will say that it's faster. It's like the small benefit. I think the big benefit is that it's more accurate, because there are things you really cannot do very easily with regexes.
Yeah, like you said, the comments and the
yeah. And there is some more things except for highlighting that comes very close. For instance, folding functions. You know, in Vim you can collapse your code if you only want to see like the function definitions, but not you want to see the signatures, but not the actual definitions of the functions. You're calling in Vim we call that a fold.
Yeah.
And this is not really syntax highlighting, but it's very close to that. So that's also something that TreeStitter can do. And things like automatic indentation. Because do you notice that Vim actually contains almost a full C parser, which is only are using for indentation. This is actually, I was almost a bit surprised when I saw this, because there is this file that is very innocently called C indent. But when you go into this file, it's a very long file, and essentially implements a C parser, which Vim only uses for indentation, but it never uses this file for highlighting, even if it could in principle.
Which file is that?
We can even look into this file, because we still have it.
Where is it?
If we go into source NVim, and it's not in a subdirectory. I think it's called C indent in this directory.
No.
Well, if you're closing this subdirectories, so we see the actual. Yeah, only this one. Yeah, it could be called indent C or something like that, but I'm pretty sure we haven't removed. Yeah, it's called indent C. Sorry.
Oh, there, indent C.
So we don't need to look into this file, but we can see the size of it. You see, it's quite long.
Yeah, it's quite long.
because this is essentially a C parser. It doesn't parse everything, but it parses most of C only to do indentation. But with TreeStitter, we will essentially get that for free, because indentation, as long as you have the actual grammar, then indentation is trivial, right? You can just count the number of blocks that you're inside, and that's like your indentation level already. So this is a file that we should be able to remove, because this file will be directly replaced by the C parser.
This is so much work that has gone into just indentation.
Not sorry, only the indentation for C, to be clear. And there's also a file that I think that implements the same thing for Lisp. So Vim also contains a Lisp parser, and of course that's much simpler than Vim. But still, it's only using this Lisp parser for indentation. You cannot do parallel in Vim because this parser is hidden. So you cannot access this Lisp parser or C parser in a plugin. It's only possible to do indentation. But we are hoping that if we remove this code, it will partially make up for the additional cost of embedding the TreeStitter library. Because the TreeStitter library, it's quite big, but it's not big compared to Vim's regex syntax highlighter, which is as big. I mean, even if we discount the regex engine itself, this is the wrapper around the regex engine that does regex highlighting in Vim. That's as big as the entire TreeStitter library.
Okay.
But unfortunately, we don't want to remove that because, as I said, there is like highlights, there is like regex highlighting for like 1,000 languages, and we don't want to remove that, to be honest. But we can remove this C parser and the Lisp parser because that will be completely replaced by TreeStitter.
Okay. Right. Yeah, the kind of the syntax highlighting, it seems so trivial and so simple, but when you really start looking into it, it's more complex than it at first seems.
Yeah, because doing correct parsing, it's quite hard to just sit down with an empty notebook or an empty code file and implement a correct parser that's incremental.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are research papers that are describing how you do incremental parsing and do it fast. So this Max Brunfeld guy, what he did was that he looked into the literature and said, what does the researcher say how you should do parsing efficiently and like specified by a declarative language instead of hard-coded. So he looked into these academic papers and he found something that was, he found like the things that wasn't too complex, but it still is like a good improvement compared to all like the manual parsers that all people are implementing. So, I mean, sometimes, I mean, there is this joke of like the academic Iverto or whatever, but sometimes it makes sense to look into all these research papers because sometimes you can find something in them that's actually are quite simple and useful to make a real-world application like a text editor.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. So what else is important about the parser? So it's going to be used for it's going to be used basically for getting a tree of the syntax, a very simple tree and fast tree.
Yeah, and there's one more thing that which is something that I haven't really been involved in because what I did was that I wrote this basic bindings for the C library, so it's exposed in Lua. But then some other contributors, especially, I don't really know, we can look later into the names. I don't want to pronounce the names. But so these contributors, which are quite new to the project, they implemented something they call the language tree. And this is not just a tree of a single language. This is a tree of languages embedded inside languages. Like a concrete example, if you have an HTML file, you will have JavaScript embedded inside it. And then exactly. Inside the JavaScript, in turn, you could have fragments of HTML embedded as strings inside the HTML code. So
So how
what
does
they are
that work?
doing is that they are putting together a unified syntax tree of all the languages that are in a single file, even if the file is a combination of 4 or 5 different languages. And this is something that's, I think it was merged into Neo-Vim master like yesterday or something like that. I mean, there are still some rough corners. It's not something that just magically works, but we want this to be included in 0.5. So you will get correct and pretty fast highlighting even for embedded languages. And this is something that the regexes already can do. But the trouble is with regexes is that when you are using regex highlighting and you say that you have 100 regexes for HTML, and then you have a 100 regexes that are for JavaScript, then all of these regexes needs to run at the same time. So when you are using combined languages with regexes, it tends to get really slow very quickly for this reason. But this language thing they are doing, this is much smarter, because then you can recognize that, oh, now we are entering a string which defines a piece of Lua code or HTML or whatever it is. And then we are activating the Lua parser only for that little piece of code. And then when we are done with that code, we turn off the Lua parser and return back to the Vim script parser, whatever the parent language was. So at any given time, only one single parser is looking into your code, even if there's 5 languages in the same file.
Okay.
So this is something that I think this is going to be huge. I think this is something that we are talking about internally, that I think this is going to be a really like a very popular feature, I think, once we get this to work and make it work nicely with all the plugins, because this a lot of the feature we're talking about, like already exist good approximations within a single language, but I think this is quite novel, this thing that they are doing with nested languages. I know TreeStitter itself, I mean, this project developed by Atom, they themselves have done a little bit about this. They call this language injections. But I think we in NeoVIM is really like pushing the boundary of what we can do with this. And I'm really excited about that.
Right. So Björn, let's dive a little bit into just Vim usage and maybe some power tips that that are specific to NeoVim.
Yeah.
I would be really curious to know some of the Vim usage power tips that you use, and if you have anything you want to share, that would be great.
Yeah, let's see. There is a little bit of it's a little bit of a tricky question, because my Vim config is essentially, I started working on my old configuration like it was like 8 years ago or something. So then this has grown organically. So there's lots of old plugins that I still use that I think could be much simplified using, if I'm writing like a new config that only works for the latest version of NeoVim.
Okay.
So, but like, to just give some concrete examples, something that we are, I think, which is a really important plugin, is this entire thing of like fuzzy finding and having like being able to quickly search for identifiers and so on.
So how do you do that yourself?
So currently I'm actually using an older plugin for that, which is called Unite. But I think what we should look into is like the future, which is telescope.nvim. So we can look into that in a web browser if you would like. And this is something I've tried it, but I'm not currently using this as a daily driver, for the simple reason that, I mean, I have a day work, so I can't spend all my time to update my config to the latest things, unfortunately, but I plan to switch to it. So telescope and Vim should work, yeah. Yeah, so it's that one. So this is going to be a really nice interface which is built on something. So this thing is written by a guy. He's called TJ Devries, but it's built on top this thing that we call floating windows. And what floating windows is that essentially it's possible to define UI widgets that works even in the terminal. As you see, it shows like this big pop-up thing which contains, if it's made up of 3 panes. So each of these 3 panes is a floating window. So this is something that actually exists already in 0.4, the stable version. This abstraction for showing floating windows. And but what he's doing, he's writing a lot of Lua code to make a really nice unified interface to finding files or to find symbols or by like exploring your Git history or whatever you want. So I think this is going to, once 0.5 is released, so we get a big user base, I think this will become like the main tool that will replace the earlier solutions, because this is like a very nice interface and it's fully asynchronous. So your Vim will never freeze because you are doing like a fuzzy query. So it will do this in the background. I'm not completely sure with the end solution. He hopes to use multi-threading to make it really non-blocking, but it's not really done yet, but that's the goal at least.
Okay.
So this thing is mostly written in Lua. So this file should be really small because this is the Vim script code, because most of the code is in Lua instead. So if you look into Lua and then telescope.
Right.
And then, yeah, so he's a really good Lua programmer. He actually wrote quite a bit of the LSP client that's part of Neo-Vim itself. So like he's not the only contributor, but I think he started it. And then some other contributors like Michael and Ashkan, they took his code and they simplified it a little, because this TJ guy, he's a big fan of abstractions, as you see. He's making many small modules, but sometimes he makes too many modules. So someone needs to step in and say, hey, we can simplify the code a little bit. But he's really making good user interfaces. And he's bringing all this like core functionality that's a bit hidden, like his floating windows, the API for that. It's really not like meant for end users because it's meant to be used by plugins. But he's really taking all these C APIs that we made and making nice like ready-made widgets for end users to use.
Okay. So what about nerd tree? Is that still the best tree view for Vim?
That's a good question, because I think this telescope, I think it wants to do this tree view exploration, but I mean, honestly, I'm not using anything like that, so I haven't really kept track of any of that, unfortunately. So I cannot really answer that question. I'm really just using, I actually am still using Unite right now, because I have a config that also works with Vim, or older version of NeoVim, which doesn't support all of this. But once NeoVim 0.5 is released, I'm going to say that, oh, now my config would only support this, and then I will use all these 0.5 only plugins like Telescope and so on.
Okay. So there's a lot of development going on now on the Lua side. So this is probably like a question that a lot of people are going to have a lot of opinions about, but why Lua? Why not Lisp, for example?
That's a good question, because when you say Lisp, you have to be more specific, because Lisp is a family of languages, right?
Okay, I'm thinking because
I'm not being rhetorical, because as I showed you before, these TreeStitter queries, they are written in like an expression-like syntax. So it would make sense, right, to have like some kind of Lisp macro system. But fortunately, some guys are currently working on implementing Lisp macros for Lua. We can look it up. It's called Fennel. If you Google on Fennel Lua, you will find it.
Fennel. How do you spell it?
Fennel, like the vegetable. Fannel. Yeah, the first one there. So this is essentially a Lisp syntax for the Lua runtime.
That's interesting.
So when you say why not Lisp, it depends on what parts of Lisp you are interested in. If you are saying Lisp in the sense of Lisp macros, then this will do everything you want.
Mm-hmm.
But like the runtime model is still Lua tables rather than consoles, for instance. So you won't get consoles with this if that's important for you.
So I think the main question is why Lua? I don't have anything. I think it's a great interpreter.
If I need to give you a one sentence answer to that question, I can give you a one word answer to the question why Lua, and the answer is LuaJIT. And LuaJIT is a really nice just-in-time compiler for Lua, and it's comparable in speed to many JavaScript JITs. I would say it's not as good as V8 maybe, but it's also much smaller than V8. It's really a just-in-time compiler that is intended for embedding. So maybe it's not as advanced as all the very fancy JavaScript JITs. Is at the same time, it's quite small and it does a lot of things for its size. So, and it also has this thing which is called CFFI, which means that inside your Lua code, you can declare essentially C header definitions to C functions. And then you can call C functions directly from Lua.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, that sounds like I've heard of LuaJIT and I used it a little bit. I guess it has more support now for different architectures like ARM and.
Yeah, this is a little bit tricky because LuaJIT stable doesn't support ARM64, but there is a release which is called LuaJIT 2.1 beta 3, which supports ARM64, and it's quite usable. I mean, many distributions are using this beta release in their stable distro on ARM64 specifically, because it's almost as good as stable, even if it's called a beta release. But the maintainer of LuaJIT, which is called Mike Pal, he took like a break from LuaJIT like a few years ago, but it seems that he's getting back into speed, which means that hopefully soon we will have an actual 2.1 release, which works for all the major platforms, which essentially is AMD64. And because of Apple are switching to ARM processors, now everyone will need to regard AR64 as like a main platform, which they already should do because of Android and iOS, of course. But still, I think this Apple thing will mean that this architecture will need to be taken seriously by everyone, which includes us and LuaJIT, obviously.
Right. So when it comes to documentation of Vim source code, is there any good place for somebody to look into where they can kind of get an overview of all this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think our wiki is it's writing a little bit more about like the layout of the source code and what the different files are, but I mean, there is no really like complete like guideline that says that, oh, if you are interested in this, you should look into this file. But because I mean, I would say our like social media and like chat forums is like very welcoming to new developers. So actually, if you are really curious about contributing C code, it's often easier to just ask us a question on like Gitter or Freenode, whatever, and there will be someone that will answer your question quite quickly. I mean, if you say that, oh, I want to add this feature to the C code, and like, what part of the source code is that? Then there's typically someone that will help you.
Yeah. I mean, I think that what it comes down to is sometimes just sort of getting an overview of the code, and like, where do you if you have an idea for some plugin, where do you fit that in? How do you
Yeah. There was actually one thing that came to mind when I asked that questions, because there was like a student project. I don't remember if they were master student or what it was, but the project essentially consisted of making an analysis of the Neo-Vim source code, and they wrote a very nice blog post about our source code, which is, I mean, I don't think it's like 100% correct in every detail, but it's still a very good introduction to our source code for a new contributor. So if I was preparing it properly, I would already have found this link for you, but I'm afraid it's a little bit tricky to find this, but maybe I can get back to you later if you want to see this, because this is a really nice blog post. So then maybe we can just link it in like the information description.
Yeah, absolutely. You could also I can invite you to our Discord as well.
Yeah, you should do that. But we could also, if you want, I could talk a little bit about the part of the source code that I've been working mostly with, because there is some part of the source code that I'm in. So one thing we could look into are the files that are called UI that underscore actually. So this will be in like a bit down below. I mean, we can look in the terminal. It's probably simpler, because so if we just go down in your tree view a bit below, because it starts with an U. So we can look into UI compositor, for instance. And maybe it's easier to demonstrate this. So if you type, let's see, can I use the chat? Because then I can type you a command. So let's say I need to, Zoom is not working very nicely on my computer, sorry, I need to convince it to.
So is compositor something new for NeoVim?
Yeah, so I will show you a command you can run. If I'm able to type in Zoom, yeah, I can do this. So you can try to run this command that I showed you. And then you could invoke, this completion menu that you can have in insert mode. So you just do anything.
So what do I do?
So if you do insert.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you type O, for instance, to get a new line. And then you can just type any letter, like if you type G, for instance, and then press Ctrl P. So I think you are still using terminal colors here, because this doesn't look very nice. But what happens if you're using true color is that you can see like the background text blending through this pop-up.
Okay, right. So yeah,
it doesn't look very good if you're having a 16 color terminal, obviously, because you don't have many colors. So this looks like an old MS-DOS user interface. But I think you can get the general idea still.
Yeah.
You can imagine it, but with better colors. So this is something that this module enables, because in the old Vim, they are not doing any double buffering. Essentially, you are having a single big array of characters which makes up the entire screen. But in NeoVim, we are doing double buffering. So by that I mean we are having a separate array for the screen, and we are having a separate grid for the pop-up menu, which means that we can combine these different layers as we want. And I call this a compositor. It's a little bit of a stretch because it doesn't work the same way as like a real compositor that's part of a GPU, for instance. But I mean, you can still do similar effects like doing blending. And I hope to, currently all of this is hard coded in C, but eventually if we are making this UI architecture more flexible, so even the terminal is an external UI, we could put in any Lua code here in between. So any sort of visual effect you could imagine being implemented by Lua is something that we could do. And then of course, if you don't want it, you're saying like, fuck this modern shit, I just want the basic terminal editor. You can of course turn it all off and return to the basic experience. So all of these crazy visual effects are always opt-in. So if you're having say that they have an SSH connection, which is slow, so you're measuring like kilobits or whatever, then you can of course turn off all these fancy effects and get something simple that compresses nicely over SSH. So it's still like backwards compatible with that sort of use case.
So this could be, maybe my version doesn't quite support the latest options. That could be the case.
But what do you mean? I think it does. It's just that you really need to set up a true color scheme in your terminal to make this look nicely. All this I'm talking about is already in 0.4, but you need to set up true color in your terminal for it to work nicely.
So this overlays something on top of the back buffer for the window.
Yeah.
Like, can you put any overlay on top of the back buffer?
Yeah, you can, because all these floating windows, as I show you, this telescope Vim, this is also a separate grid. So you could enable this blend effect also there.
Okay.
You can even change the blend level for a specific highlight group. So for instance, in this pop-up window, you could make, for instance, like the currently selected item is always 100% solid. So only the unselected elements will blend the background. So we have this detail level of control already.
Okay. Right. It would be really cool to get some in-depth overview of the source code, but we don't have so much time right now. But
yeah.
I think kind of like...
So, but speaking very generally, we are working a lot of in the UI layer. So something that we are working on currently is what we call decorations, which is, it's essentially like the signs that already exist in Vim, but we want to make it more flexible. So we have this thing already that's called virtual text. So if you have like an error message by the compiler, you can show this inline in the same window. So, I mean, Vim has this thing that they're calling the C list. So you get like the list of compiler errors in a separate window. But what we want is to be able to display those errors also inside the same window. And we already implement that for LSP. So if you're using libclang, as you spoke about before, you will get clang error message inline in the same window as you type. So this is something I use all the time. So I will say that for me, at least for the other things that I have added myself to Neo-Vim, then it's this virtual text thing. Because when I combine this with this LSP client code that were written by some other people, then I can just type things. And while I'm typing in insert mode, then Clang will give me like feedback within 200 milliseconds if I'm using an undefined variable, or like there is like an unused variable inside this function, or I'm having the wrong number of parameters, whatever. So this has really helped me when I write C code. So I no longer need to run :make and then get compile errors. I get only the compile errors if I just type in insert mode, and then I like to make like a pause in my typing and give Vim like 200 milliseconds, then it will immediately get the compile errors back to me. And that's something, it's very nice, but it's not very flexible right now, because as a plugin, you cannot really control how these are displayed. So that's what I'm and a bunch of other core developers are working right now. So we want to make this diagnostics feature very flexible and usable by any plugin, and then be displayable by the user in any way that they prefer.
Yeah, that's really cool. So that can essentially place together with a tree sitter. You can place icons anywhere in the code.
Yeah. So I don't really think it is connected with TreeStitter, but you are right. You can, of course, take one of these diagnostic error messages, and then you can say that, oh, I prefer if all the errors for this function are placed in the beginning of this function. And then you can use TreeStitter, of course, to get this information. So there's nothing stopping a plugin to combine the LSP information with the TreeStitter information, as you say, because a plugin is used any Lua code, and it can use both TreeStitter and LSP as libraries and do whatever it wants to.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, there is a lot of other stuff we could talk about, but I think these are like the main things we hope to get out in 0.5 very soon. So we are having this informal goal that we want 0.5 to be ready for Christmas, but we probably won't be able to tag like 0.5 stable button. But what I'm hoping is that we are having all these core APIs in place, and we can like 99% almost promise that these APIs are like stable, so plugins could be comfortable to start using them. So because we don't want to change the API as soon as a lot of plugins are using them, even if it's not formally stable, because that makes the life harder, of course. But our goal is to have all the main features more or less done by the time of Christmas, like in the end of December. And then probably we will need more time to fix bugs and write better documentation, because I mean, a feature is useless if it is not properly documented right. So you probably need more time to write good documentation. But hopefully we can say that by the end of this year, all these features, they exist in the C code, and we are doing all these language things where you combine different languages, and we have a good solid base library for LSP that other plugins can depend on. And we are having a good abstraction for diagnostics that plugins can depend on. So, and then we will have something that even if it's not stable, it's sort of like a release candidate that we can ask a larger base of plugin developers and also end users to try out, hopefully before the end of this year. But we will see. I mean, things always take a longer time than you expect, right? But
Yeah.
I felt like this was like my idea, which I had in the beginning of September, because you need some kind of idea of a deadline, even if you know that whatever deadline you set, you will probably fail. I mean, you need to have some kind of perspective of what the time is. So I'm saying that we should think what features we can really realistically get in time for Christmas, because that will be like a reasonable upgrade from 0.4 to 0.5. And then we can more like bigger factors we can do it like in separate branches, and we can get back to them once that 0.5 is released, because I think TreeStitter and LSP, they are already such a big improvement for end users, so we don't want users to need to wait for other stuff before we are getting that out to our users.
What about all the plugins for original Vim? Are you making an effort to make sure that all of them continue to work, or? Is there a chance?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a tricky situation because all Vim plugins that were written for Vim version 7.4 essentially work unmodified in NeoVim because that was the time we forked it, right? But as I said, Vim hasn't stood still either. I mean, Vim has also developed, and Vim by their own has added their own API for asynchronous events, which is different from us. And they added their own API for pop-up windows, which are different from us.
Mm-hmm.
So this is sort of like a little bit of an unfortunate situation that we really didn't manage to succeed to collaborate on these APIs. And I mean, of course, it's always with open source projects and communication. It's always difficult for two different projects to always synchronize. But we hope to be able to make life not so difficult for plugins that want to support both, but there will be a need of a sort of set of libraries that tries to mask over the difference between C APIs, because those will continue to be different between Vim and NeoVim. And there's one more thing, because Vim, they were also discussing the language question, right? Because the Vim script, it's not a fast language. It wasn't intended as a scripting language at all. Vim script is really just the old X editor. You know, this editor where you type the command that means substitute, and then there is a command for insert some text after line 10. So
Yeah.
it's a language is like a DSL only for text editing. And then Vim, which is like a re-implementation of X/VI, they added more and more scripting features to this X language. So now you have if statements, and you have functions, and now you even have data types like lists and dictionaries. But this language, it's pretty slow because it was never intended to be a scripting language.
So it was just a development of they just added things to it, and then eventually it became Vim script.
Yeah, so they just added a single feature at a time. So so the point is that this implementation is really slow. So there was like a discussion among us, like maybe Vim also can adopt like either Python or Lua, whatever, as like the new scripting language. But what Bram chose to do is that he's making a new version of Vim script, which he calls Vim 9. So this is like a dialect of Vim script that has some restrictions, like how you're using scoping and how you're using these old X commands and so on, which makes it possible to compile this new revision to a bytecode. So essentially, Vim 9 should have similar performance to, say, Python, which is also a bytecode language. So, but unfortunately, this means that if you're writing a plugin and you're saying that old Vim script is too slow, you need to choose to either write it in Vim 9 script, which is only supported by Vim, or this Lua, which, to be clear, Vim can be compiled with Lua support, but it's optional. So the thing that NeoVim did, which I think was very important, is that we took this Lua interface and we say that now this is mandatory. So whenever a user runs a version of NeoVim, they know for a fact that Lua is available, so that plugin orders can feel comfortable in using Lua because it's always available. But if you're writing a plugin in Lua, you cannot be sure that it works in Vim all the time, because many versions of Vim will be compiled without Lua support. And also, it will only support this basic Lua interface. I mean, if you write a modern Lua plugin, you will want to use like the TreeStitter library and the LSP library and so on. And if you want to make a good plugin, and that thing will probably never be like fully compatible with Vim, because Vim only has this baseline Lua support where you can you can still do a lot. Like you could change the text of a buffer, you can open and close a window and so on, but still this shared subset of Lua interface is much smaller than the Lua interface in NeoVIM. So, but there are already some people in NeoVIM. They are working on a compiler that compiles Vim 9 script into Lua code, which is very interesting, because the idea that is that we can take this restricted subset of Vim script, which is possible to statically analyze, and then we could compile it to Lua. And eventually we could even translate, for instance, if you are calling the function which is called pop-up show in Vim, which is how you show a pop-up window in Vim, then we can compile it to a library call, to a Lua library that are emulating that C interface by some Lua code, which then calls into our floating windows, which uses a slightly different API. So, but this is a bit speculative. It's not, I cannot promise that this works seamlessly for every use case, but hopefully we can support like a subset of Vim 9 script and a subset of the new APIs. So then it will be possible to write a plugin that works in both editors. But if it will never be as convenient as just choosing one of the other, because once you make your decision that you only support NeoVim 0.5 or you only support Vim 9, then you can like use all of the new interfaces and you don't really need to worry about compatibility. But still, we want to make it possible to write the plugin for both editors. If that is your goal with the plugin, that you want to support both, it will be possible. But regardless of what we do, it will always be some friction. We cannot promise like a seamless experience of supporting both, because I mean, there's so many small things that have changes, so that we cannot really promise that it will work exactly the same way in both editors, regardless of what we add on top.
Right. So how come you guys don't collaborate more, maybe with the main Vim team? It was the main?
I would say, to be honest, I would say that we are better in collaborating now than it used to be.
Okay.
And because I think Bram has I mean, I don't really want to speculate what his motivations are, but generally, I think both of us has become better in like understanding each other's intention and how we both prefer to communicate. So there has been more features from Neo-Vim merged back to Vim with the same API. So very recently, there is this feature in Neo-Vim which is called command mappings, which is like a new way of defining key mappings, which is like much easier to use because you don't need to think of what the mode is. So you can essentially define a key binning the same way as you define an auto command. And that's something that Vim merged. I think it was like 1 week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and they merged the same interface as NeoVim is using. So this is something that a plugin can use now, the same code, and it works in both Vim and NeoVim. And even some developers of Vim said that, hey, some part of this API is a bit suboptimal. I mean, it doesn't really work well with operators. So then they changed that part. And I said, oh, I agree. This is a better way. This is like a better way of interpreting these sort of commands. So then I merged their patch back into NeoVim. So now, if you're using command mappings, you will get the best experience in both Vim and NeoVim. So sometimes, I mean, for some like isolated APIs like that, we are managing to collaborate. And there are a few other examples like that. But unfortunately, for these bigger things, like the new plugin language and floating windows, that's a lot of code, and that's require a lot of coordination to really have the same API in both. And I know for a fact that Bram is very interested in TreeStitter because he knows about TreeStitter and he understands what it can do. But there is like a tricky situation because we wrote this API in Lua, and this was before he worked on Vim 9 script. This was really before Vim decided how they will tackle the language question. So now, if Vim wants to include TreeStitter, which is something I think that Bram wants to do, it's like very unclear how they will do that and show like a compatible API, because Bram would probably want to make a Vim 9 script API for TreeStitter. I mean, this is not something he has said. I'm just speculating him. I mean, it will be reasonable for Bram to want to have a Vim 9 script API for TreeStitter, right? Because that's the language that he shoots for his editor. But that means that, unfortunately, for a plugin writer, it could be tricky then to write a plugin that works both Vim and Neo-Vim using the new TreeStitter interfaces.
Right. So what is the main argument against making Lua default on in the real Vim? Like, why not make it mandatory?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, it's almost easier if you were to ask Bram himself, because it feels like I could try to summarize his arguments, but I mean, to be clear, I'm very biased because I'm like one of the NeoVim core developers, and we don't really think that the reasoning really makes sense. But partially that's because we in NeoVim, we don't think like we have the time to interpret the scripting language. That's a lot of work that a lot of people already has done. So we just include this logic thing, which is amazing, and we are getting this speedily language for free. But Bram feels like he has the time to implement the compiler. And
Right.
it's sort of, we can't really blame him for that, because he decides himself that he has the time to write this. So, I mean, it's hardly, we can't really be too judgmental about that. We can say it's like unfortunate that he didn't choose to go the Lua way, but if you want to understand his reasoning, to be honest, it's better that you get in contact with Bram himself, because usually if you're having very direct and concrete questions, then Bram will answer them. I mean, he's not difficult to work with at all, but it's just that our priorities and his priorities are a bit different, and we are trying our best to collaborate, but it's not like we dislike each other. It's just that sometimes we do have different priorities, and then it doesn't make sense for us to collaborate on everything. And and I guess to be really fair, you should also ask Bram about this to get like his view of things, because I think he will give some good arguments why he did Mindscript instead of Lua.
Yeah.
That
I mean, it could be quite obvious that Lua is like Vim has to support so many different architectures, and especially JIT is not supporting all of them.
But I don't think that is the problem, to be honest, because you don't need to use Lua JIT. You can still use the old Lua implementation. This Lua JIT is mostly for speed. And then there's also this FFI thing I spoke of, but our Lua code doesn't use that. So it's perfectly valid to run NeoVim with Lua without JIT. And it's still a lot faster than the old Vim script. It won't be faster than the new Vim script, but it's still a good, I mean, Lua, this has been used for scripting in like the the Game Boy, or a lot of small embedded architectures, because even Lua without JIT, it's really fast and small. So I think Bram's reasoning is more that he wants to make a language that's very similar to the old Vim script, because then you can take your old Vim script plugin and only make some very small changes to it to make it compatible. So that, if I should play like the devil's advocate and try to defend Bram's reasoning, it's like he wants to make a language that's very similar to the existing Vim scripts, so it's easy for plugins to upgrade. So I would say the main difference is that we did this Lua thing like several years ago, and then we realized, oh, we don't have time to dig into Vim script and make it faster, or even implement a new language. So we just said that, oh, Lua and LuaJIT, this is a good language. And as Vim already has like an optional Lua interface, we can just make that mandatory and then build on top of that. So essentially, Bram really feels like he has the time to write a compiler for the existing language. And then he can make something that's a little bit easier for old plugins to migrate to the new language. I think that's like a good that's like a good argument for Vim 9. And as I said, some guys in our community, they are really crazy, but in a good way. As I told you, they are working on trying to compile this new Vim 9 language into Lua, as I
Right.
told you. And I cannot promise that this will be like flying colors or whatever, but if things work out well, then we will be able to also support a lot of Vim 9 plugins, if not all of them, of course.
Yeah, that sounds like an interesting way of solving the problem, that that you can compile that new script.
Yeah.
But that would kind of also mandate that that Vim 9 script is the default, that all the old scripts are made deprecated, and everything.
I don't think Bram plans of making it the default. What you instead do is that inside your Vim script file, I mean, normally when you define a function in Vim script, you're using a command which is called function. So what Bram did is that he implemented a different command for defining a Vim 9 script function. So this is currently an opt-in thing. So all the old plugins for Vim 8 and older, they will still work in Vim 9, but they will use this slower implementation of the language, which Bram doesn't want to remove as little as we do. But then a Vim plugin, they can opt in to using the new Vim 9 interpreter. And then they will probably need to make some smaller changes to the code to make it fully compatible. So there will always, regardless if you're using Neo-Vim with Lua or Vim 9 with the Vim 9 script, both of us will still need to carry like this old Vim script interpreter as part of the source code, because there are a lot of old plugins. As I told you, all this syntax highlighting and indentation or whatever for this 1,000 different languages, all of this is written in the old Vim script. And neither us or Vim are intending to rewrite all of that in a new language. So I think with the old Vim script interpreter, the slow one, it will still remain. But hopefully this can be a quite isolated module. So if you are writing new code in either Vim 9 script or Lua in our case, you're not really reliant on this old interpreter. It just sticks along because people are still running old plugins that depend on it.
All right. Well, it sounds like there are a few things to do until Christmas, and hopefully 05 version is out by Christmas, right? Is that the plan?
The plan, I will say, is that by 0.5, all of the new APIs are stable.
Okay.
I can't really promise that we can get so far that we are formally tagging say like a 0.5 beta. This is something that I would like to do, but as you know, as many people in open source do, I have this thing that you call a day job, which also takes a lot of time.
Yes.
So I don't really want to promise that I'm able to get like a release out by 0.5. But what I do think we can do is to say that all the important APIs and interfaces, they are merged into master, and we are pretty sure that we don't need to change them in a big way, because we can do things like we have like an options dictionary, and then we can add more flags later, but we don't need to make any breaking changes to the API. So hopefully what we can say on 0.5 is that, we don't have a release yet, but this version of master, the APIs are probably not going to change from this version to the actual release. So it makes sense for plugin developers to start using it, and all these users that are very impatient. When is the release? When can we use TreeStitter? We can say, you can download a pre-release binary for the latest 90 version, and there will still be bugs. But if you are writing a configuration for this version, then you don't need to change your config when the release comes, because all the configuration options and so on will not change anymore, hopefully. So it will be API stable, even if it's not stable in the sense that it's bug free, or I mean bug free in the sense that it doesn't have known bugs, because that would probably realistically take longer than Christmas. Probably it will be some time into next year to actually say that we are comfortable with all the bug fixes, so we can actually take a stable release.
Okay. So, so who are the most active members right now in the development team?
Yeah, that's a question that we could answer by looking into this contribution statistics.
Yeah, we could do that. Shall we get out of the source code and just look at the?
Yeah, we can do that. We go to this guy's. Now my computer got very. Is my microphone still working? Let's see.
Yeah, your microphone is working.
That's good, because Zoom got very angry at me about my microphone, but never mind then. So if we can look, I think it's easier if we go to GitHub. So we go to the GitHub page for Neo-Vim. Yeah, that one. Maybe we can make the browser window a bit later, because then GitHub will realize that we are on a real computer and not a smartphone. Very good. So if we go into Insights, and then we can look into contributors to the left.
So Jan, oh yeah. There.
So this will be like the full contribution history, but I think it's still quite nice to see, because Justin MK, he's still like the BDFO, so to speak. He hasn't been very active for the latest months, but he has told us that this is a good thing, because our product is so well structured. So even if like the main maintainer, Justin, I mean, even if he's like very busy with day job stuff, we can still keep going, because he doesn't like personally own all the code, because we have like delegated code ownership. So for instance, this Jan Lasso guy, his main priority is to merge patches from Vim into Neo-Vim. So he's really good at understanding all the differences between Vim and Neo-Vim. Okay. So whenever someone else has a problem about that, like understanding the difference, they can ask him. And Sixy, this is a bit unfortunate. We don't really know why he left, but as we know, when we heard from him, he was also a grad student like me. So probably what happened was that he got a really good day job, and now he's working full time. Mm-hmm. But anyway, Jameson is also very important, because he is also like the Debian maintainer of both the Vim and Neo-Vim Debian packages. So he sort of gives the perspective of a distro maintainer, even if he's also a contributor of Neo-Vim itself. And as I told you before, he's very much involved in getting our tooling and infrastructure working smoothly. So I think he's like the main person driving this migration to GitHub Actions, which will make, this, when you're getting this continuous integration feedback on the pull requests, because we want that to be as quick as possible. So okay. He's really working on that. And then the other contributors that are active right now, it's not only people that are contributing to the master branch, because if you want, we can go into this Vim TreeStitter project, as I talked about before.
So in the TreeStitter repository, or?
No, it's this other repository, which is called NVim-TreeStitter.
Mm-hmm.
It's not here. You have to Google
for it,
because it's a separate organization. Yeah, that's really good, because the thing first hit there. So we can look into the contributions for this repository. it's a bit weird that this is slow because this is a much smaller repo. But
Yeah.
give it a few more seconds. It should take like less. Yeah. So Viggo, I mean, I don't really know how to pronounce his surname. I mean, he's a French guy, but he has really, I mean, when we started with TreeStitter integration, it was like really me personally who was driving that. But then he has sort of taken over as the code owner for the TreeStitter part. But then also he and the Hamster and some of the other guys, they have put a lot of effort in making this language tree thing. I don't really even know how it works, which is a good thing because we want to have delegated responsibility, right? So we want to have to say that these guys, they are focusing on TreeStitter and they are making it work really nicely. So
Okay.
these people have put in a lot of effort into making, you mean like basic applications of TreeStitter, like indentation and refactoring and identification of local variables and so on. And the point of this repo is that this is like sort of like a staging ground where they do a lot of the work, but then later on they try to get this work merged back into Neo-Vim itself because we want all the core abstractions, including the language tree, to be a part of Neo-Vim itself. So our plugins know that it exists.
Okay.
So these people are also very important as contributors, even if their statistics doesn't show up on the main repo yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then also this TJ guy, as I talk about, he's writing a lot of Lua code, which is outside the main repo as well. But he provides us with a lot of feedback about the core APIs that we need to change and improve. And then there is another guy called Ashkan Kiani. He's like a wizard of Luajit. So he's writing some really nice Lua plugins for even something simple as like a colorizer. I mean, a plugin which detects when you have like a hash code for a color and shows it.
Okay.
Which sounds like a very simple thing, but you cannot really do that with regexes. So even without using TreeStitter or anything like that, he wrote some really advanced logic code just to make it really fast. So you can always have this plugin on by default and you don't notice any slowdown. And he's also working on things like a framework for Lua plugins, because we want to have like standard patterns how to define mappings and commands and so on by Lua plugins so they don't conflict with each other. So
Yeah.
he was also having a lot of like feedback about the core design. So, and then I'm obviously talking about like the people that are very active right now that I see in the chat, but then of course there's been a lot of older contributors that are not very active right now, but they still have a very big impact. I can mention a good example, which is this. Have you seen this incremental command feature? This thing where you get incremental feedback when you are constructing a substitute.
No, I haven't seen that. Which one do you mean?
It's we can show it actually because this is a really old feature. So we can just go into Neo-Vim again. I know we are getting a bit late, but this is very simple to demonstrate. So if you just open any file that has some code, it could be anything. Even like, yes, even this will work. And then you do, I can type it in the chat. I think it's simpler if my keyboard is working.
Yeah, just tell me.
In command. So if you just run this command. Okay. And now if you start the command line again and you type a %, and then you type S. No, I mean in the
Oh,
command
command
line.
line. Okay. Yeah.
And don't hit enter at any time. And then you type a /. And now you can start to search for something.
Oh, okay.
And it shows you interactive feedback. And this, if you type another / now, and now you can type something else. So it will show you interactive feedback. And my point is
Can I navigate this somehow?
I'm afraid not.
Okay.
This is something that I want to improve when I get time. But the point I was trying to make here was this feature, it was not implemented by any core developer. This was a summer project by 4 bachelor students in computer science in some university, which I already have forgotten. So they basically had as a summer project to implement this feature. And then, of course, we core developers, we needed to step in and improve some parts of it. But essentially, they did all of the core logic of parsing the syntax of this substitute and figure out what state we're in. So I would say this is a good example of what we in the Neo-Vim project want to enable. Because it's not only that we core developers, that we are cozy with each other and can develop things, we also want to enable new contributors to step in quite quickly and get really dirty down in the C code. So
Yeah.
this
I mean,
was
you guys need to sort of put together some kind of training where you can share some of the knowledge that you have.
Yeah, something that has been very good for us is this Google Summer of Code, which we have participated a few things, because this has really forced us to streamline the process of getting in new contributors. So there are some documentation. I just mean basic things like getting a build with all the debug symbols and starting a debugger. I mean basic things like that. We had made sure to document. And then how to start out to make a very small patch, maybe based on a Vim patch, and make your first commit and your first pull requests. All these things that you don't think of when you're an experienced GitHub user, because this is second nature. All these small things, we are continuously working on trying to document that. So if you are a new contributor, you don't need to go in the chat and ask us 50 questions. So maybe you only need to ask us 5 questions. And then we can show you this file that's called contributors.md, which will ask the 20 most common questions that all new contributors have. So this is really important to us. I would say this is as much important as the concrete addition of features, which is the motivation of Neo-Vim. It's also to make it really easy for new people to get started with the C code.
Yeah, I mean, something that would be really cool is if you guys could stream yourselves work or have live coding sessions where
yeah, there is one of us who does that. This TJ guy. I will send you a link to his Twitch channel.
Yeah,
because you should really check it
cool.
out. This is, I think he does a lot of what you want to see already. Even if he's mostly working in Lua, not C, but still he's making a lot of important contributions and giving feedback to us people that are working on the C code. And we like to joke that half of the important decisions are made on the chat of his Twitch channel, just because he's the most busy guy that are live streaming his coding. So then he are asking the rest of us questions while he's coding, and we can really quickly get into the mood of discussing something concrete in the code. Because usually if you're having an informal discussion without sharing the code, you can misunderstand each other. But if you're really sharing the screen and looking at the code like he does, then you can focus the discussion on the actual code and really get into what is the actual problem and what is it that we need to add or change to move forward as a project. So his Twitch channel has been very, very good, I think, for the community, and communication in the
Yeah, I
among
think
core
that's really
developers.
powerful to be able to just work like that together
Yeah,
and share.
yeah.
Is it possible? Do you know if it's possible in Twitch to have multiple people on voice at the same time, or do you have to use Discord as an extra voice channel?
That's a very good question, because typically when people stream from Twitch, I don't think Twitch itself does that, but
Mhm.
what Twitch streamers do is that they use this software called OBS,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is like a media suite. So, and then you can, of course, you can bring audio from your Discord or from a Zoom meeting or whatever, and then
Mhm.
stream that out to the public Twitch channel. So I
Yeah.
have seen a lot of Twitch streamers, not only like programming, like even some like gamers or like some like political group. What they typically do is that they have a Discord group that you can join. But if you only want to do chatting, then you can follow along with Twitch and use the Twitch chat.
Okay. Right. Okay. Cool. We're kind of running out of time. We're a bit
Yeah,
past the end
yeah,
here,
yeah. But
Björn.
I
But
think I
it
have
was,
managed to say at least some of the things
yeah,
I wanted
it
to
was a
say.
great discussion.
Yeah,
I think
uh,
cool features and
yeah.
great to have somebody here just talking about NeoVIM.
Yeah, and
And
to be clear, I mean I've mentioned all like the contributors that come to my mind, but if you are following along the commit log, you will see a lot of contributions from like we have a lot of contributors that are only contributing one small thing or a few small things, and I will say this is as important as us core guys that stick
mhm.
along for a long time. I mean, we want people to be able to drive in and make like a small contribution and then leave if that's what all they do. So we are really having a long tail of contributors, which you can see for yourself if you look into the contributor graph or the Git log.
Are there any kind of like commercial use cases for Vim? This is like a really long shot question, but
That's a good question, because a lot of people in companies they are using Vim or NeoVim as their IDE when they're doing professional programming.
yeah,
But it sort of
exactly.
feels like you're asking for something more like that, like making NeoVim part of a product.
Or
And
at least, or also getting those people kind of on board with suggesting features. But I guess a lot of people do that already, uh,
yeah,
and getting involved
so
in the project.
because the main people we interact like that, they are people developing other editors. Like this Onivim I showed you, they are
Mhm.
they are like a company,
Yeah.
and they are working on their own thing now. But they still have contributed a lot of money to Neovim, and they have contributed suggestions like what APIs they want to see. So we are, I mean, we also get some. To be honest, I haven't really looked into the latest numbers, but sometimes we have some companies that are sponsoring us with some money. I don't want to name any names because I could be wrong here, but we rely on a lot of financial contributors that are both big and small. And we quite recently, if I'm going to plug something, we quite recently set up GitHub sponsors. So if you want to support NeoVim by any amount, like as small as a single dollar or more than that, then it's quite easy to sign up for this and use this as like a crowdfunding platform.
Is that something new that GitHub has set up, where projects can be sponsored?
I think
Okay.
this is quite new. Maybe it's like a year old or maybe 2 years old. So it's still not used by a lot of big projects. I will say that we are one of the first bigger projects that's using this. So,
So
but they have
what is
been
the
very
most common way
collaborative and talking
for
with us
companies to
to make
sponsor
this.
you?
Sorry, what did you say?
What is the most common way for companies to sponsor you? Is it just that they hire some developers to do some feature?
This is a good question. I mean, the main sponsorship I see is like in the form of money, because when people come in and they contribute code or join like the process, I don't really care what they come from, if they are like a hobby programmer or like an academic or a company. I mean, if you come here and contribute code, we're just like evaluating your contribution completely regardless of what your background is, because that shouldn't really matter, I think. It's like anyone that feels like they have time to spend to write code, or even just like writing documentation or file bug reports, which is also important. I mean, we appreciate all those contributions, regardless if this is done by like an employee or like a hobbyist or whatever.
Yeah, I understand that, but it's like when it comes to the money contributions, is it that companies donate to the project, or do they hire some developers to do some feature? What is the most common way?
I can't really say that I've seen something like that, like a developer that says, "Hey, I'm employed by this company and I will implement this feature." I will say that the closest thing to that is actually TreeStitter, because that's written by a GitHub employee, and that was not written for Neo-Vim. I mean, TreeStitter, this existed for like 3 or 4 years before we looked into it, but they have been like very collaborative with us. So when we say that, oh, we will want this feature, then this Max guy and other employees by GitHub, then they have been responsible and like implemented features for us. So even if they are not contributing to the Neo-Vim source code itself, you could sort of maybe sort it in the same category, because they are really keen on having us as a user. So they want to support us by explaining things to us when the TreeStitter document is unclear, or even adding more code to a TreeStitter. So I would say that's a very good collaboration with like a company like collaborator, even if they are not working on Neo-Vim itself, even if it's just a library, it's still very important.
Okay. Cool. Okay, thank you for taking your time to really go in depth on this.
Yeah, thank you. I to be honest, I really didn't have time to prepare much for this, but I think we still managed to get some important things through here.
Yeah, no, it was really good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right,
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, let's see. Maybe someday we can go in some more detail, and let's just keep everyone in the loop.
Yeah. To be clear, if you're really interested, I think there is some other core contributors that you could talk to, even if it's like just informally, or if it's like an interview or whatever. Sure, we can arrange that if you're interested.
Yeah, let's see what new features you guys are going to be developing, and just let me know when there's something coming out.
You can start with just inviting me to your Discord, and we can talk more.
Yeah, definitely. I've invited you to the Discord. You got to click the link now, because when I close this session, you're not going to have the link anymore.
Yeah. So you sent it to my email.
No, I sent it on the chat.
Oh, let's see. You mean the Discord? Yeah. I should click on that now.
Yeah, just click.
And I should click on accept. So I have it. Yeah, now I have it. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, thank you, Björn.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good evening.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.